Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to our TPP call. This call is being put on by our newly named group, the Trade Justice Alliance. So I want to welcome everybody. Tonight, our topic is going to be TPP, militarism, and Obama's Pacific pivot. So I am so glad that all of you chose to join us tonight. Now, be sure, in order to get the audio, that you call in either by phone or on Skype, and the number is right on the slide that I'm playing. So the phone number is area code 605-562-3140, and the PIN number is 951146. Now, if you are a speaker, you were given a special PIN, so please use the PIN that was given to the speaker. Tonight, our speakers are going to be Arnie Saiki, coordinator of Moana Nui Action Alliance, Jan Weinberg of Show Up America, Nina, Macapinlac of Bayan, USA, Dr. Margaret Flowers, co-director of Popular Resistance and co-organizer of EPP, Adam Weissman, Trade Justice New York, and Global Justice for Animals and the Environment, and Emilyanne Slaydon, TPP Media March. I am Andrea Miller, and again, I want to welcome you. I'm the executive director of People Demanding Action, and I'm going to walk you very, very briefly just through the call structure. The audio is phone only. You do need to call in. We don't use the video cameras because some of our guests are on dial-up, and we do try to keep the bandwidth as low as possible. All calls are recorded, and immediately when this webinar call is over, a link to the recording along with the PowerPoint is going to be posted in several different places. So you will be able to go back and listen to the full recording of the call. We keep the conference call in Q&A mode to eliminate any background noise so that we are able to get the highest quality recording possible. There will be several Q&A sections in this webinar, and you will be instructed to press *6, and that will put you in the queue. And I see a number of people making use of the chat room. The only thing we ask in the chat room is that you keep your discussion on topic. All right. Now, technical information. I already mentioned that our audio is dial-up only, 605-562-3140, and the access code is 951146. You are currently using the chat room. There is a share button at the bottom right of this room, and I'm just now remembering that I did not upload this PowerPoint into the share room, but you can get all the past PowerPoints in the share room. After the call, we have everything in a folder on peopledemandingaction.org. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that link directly in the chat box. You can also download everything from the Facebook page page that Tom Hot King has just added. So we do normally keep everything on Facebook. For those who are not on Facebook, we keep it on the website. Now I'm going to introduce a team of people that make it possible for us to have these webinars. I'm going to start with Tom Hot King, our technical advisor and Facebook page manager. Tom is with Move On in Pennsylvania. Tom will handle free and post-call technical questions. He is our global team Facebook page manager, and our Facebook page is facebook.com/group/global team. And I have to keep turning off these video cameras, but that's okay. Our chat host, a member of our call planning team, is Lisa Oldendorf from Move On New York. She is our chat host, part of our call planning team, and was the subject of a wonderful article about a great training that she did in New York. I believe that was last week. Also on our call planning team is Harriet Haywood. She's the call co-organizer. She is the People Demanding Action Florida State Leader. And Harriet is always doing something, and I keep forgetting to take off that upcoming Tampa event. But like I said, Harriet is always doing something. Also on our team is Celeste Drake. She is the Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist from the AFL-CIO. We have a very large team, as you can see. We also have Linda Brewster. Linda Brewster is on our team. She is with Move On in Washington State. Mara Cohen is another member of our team. She works with me on mass criminalization. She is also a popular resistance organizer, and she also works with global climate convergence in her home state of Illinois. And now we're going to bring up our very first special guest, Emilyanne Slaydon, who is the Director of Social Media for TPP Media March. Emilyanne, I'm going to just let you take the rest. Go ahead, Emilyanne. Welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. We'll show you our Twitter Storm meme for this week. There it is. So, yeah, we had such great action on February 4th. I would like to continue the momentum of this throughout the oncoming months. It's going to be a long campaign. But, yeah, let's not drop the focus on these 28 House Democrats who voted for Fast Track twice. I bet that everyone on this call probably knows one person and many of these districts, these 28 districts. And maybe, you know, we have some months here that we can maybe reach out to people, pull them into our Sunday night calls, and just, you know, share information for them and pull them into our movement. We have some time here to do this, and we can really be effective. So this is the Storm meme for this week. I've had some people actually reach out to me on email saying that they've been emailing their House reps, and they're really tired of getting these vague form letters in return. And, you know, I hear you. So what do I say to that is, well, then it's time to rally at these House reps' offices locally, okay? And you ally with, you know, other activists in your area locally, and you just start taking pictures and posting them on social media. We'll post them in our Tuesday Twitter Storm, and we'll just start making some noise and keep the pressure up on the months coming. So I'd like to say also, if you have any social media questions, anything you'd like to know, I'm going to put my email right here. Please email me, and I will answer one question each week here. That's all. Thank you so much. I'll see you on TPP Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you so very much, Emilyanne. And this is a great way to join people on a Tuesday night to do something that you can very easily do from the comfort of your own home. I'd like to introduce our next guest, Mr. Jan Weinberg from Show Up America. Jan is the founder and of Show Up America, and the central focus of this group is to educate the public on how to get involved through civic engagement to create change in government, particularly at the local level. There are so many organizations that work on trying to change things at the national level. It is always wonderful to find a group that's working on doing this at the local level. Jan is a long-time social justice activist. He began organizing in the late 60s as a peace advocate during the Vietnam War, and more recently with the Occupy movement, Occupy Alternative Banking, the People's Climate March, and Flush the TPP. Jan has more recently focused his work on the influence of the military-industrial complex on free trade agreements, specifically the pivot to Asia and TPP deliberations through his project called Violence Incorporated. So, Jan, I didn't check first. Have you joined the call?
Yes, I'm on the call.
Marvelous. Then what I'm going to do, Jan, is I'm going to bring up your first slide and take it away.
Greetings, everyone. From President Eisenhower's farewell address. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. My name is Jan Weinberg. I'm the founder of Show Up America, an Occupy movement-inspired initiative. Thank you to People Demanding Action, Trade Justice Alliance for putting together these informative TTP conference call webinars. Thank you, Harriet Hayward, for introducing me to this fantastic organization and inviting me to speak this evening as part of TPP, militarism, and Obama's Pacific Pivot. I'm also greatly appreciative to have been involved with Flush the TPP as a media mobilizer, and in particular for the Flood Congress action that took place on March 19, 2015. That was the quest where I found my inspiration. Next slide, please. We have a very special treat in store with Arnie and Nina's presentations, but first, it's my job to warm up the crowd. Or rather, I hope to get you hot under the collar with the information that I've assembled in my Violence Incorporated research initiative. Unwarranted influences, indeed. I will briefly address the confluence of President Obama's pivot to Asia, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that of the large-scale business interests, specifically those of the defense contractors, arms manufacturers. I'm quoting from the President's Export Council website. The President's Export Council serves as the principal national advisory committee on international trade. The Council advises the President of government policies and programs that affect U.S. trade performance, end quote. As a reference, among others, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton served on the President's Export Council, as does Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter and Michael Foman, the U.S. Trade Representative. President Obama assigned James McNerney to serve as the chairman of the President's Export Council, while Mr. McNerney simultaneously was employed as the president and CEO of Boeing, which happens to be one of the largest weapons manufacturers, and while Mr. McNerney also served as the chairman of the Business Roundtable. In addition, Marilyn Houston, the president of Lockheed Martin, a member of the Business Roundtable, also serves on the President's Export Council. Next slide, please. The Business Roundtable is made up of wealthy CEOs of many of the largest and influential corporations in the country. The Business Roundtable had their hand in NAFTA for their own business interests, and for many years now, the Business Roundtable have supported the pivot to Asia, Obama's effort to obtain trade promotion authority and the TPP through direct lobbying efforts. The Business Roundtable initiated the Trade Benefits America Coalition, one of the most pervasive and yet quiet lobbying efforts. The Business Roundtable is woven into the fabric of government corporate collusion. But nothing more insidious, and I'm repeating this. President Obama assigned James McNerney to serve as the chairman of the President's Export Council, while Mr. McNerney simultaneously was employed as the president and CEO of Boeing, while McNerney also served as the chairman of the Business Roundtable. Obama's pivot to Asia and the Trans-Pacific Partnership are inextricably linked. Susan Rice, who is the United States National Security Advisor, said that Hillary Clinton, and I'm quoting Susan Rice from her June 18, 2015 interview with Bloomberg Politics, was instrumental in formulating and implementing the rebalanced Asia, of which the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a part, end quote. By the way, most of the government officials in Asia objected to the use of the words pivot to Asia, so our government officials started saying rebalance instead. Through the pivot to Asia foreign policy initiatives, the Obama administration, including then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, negotiated what might be construed as side agreements with the Asia-Pacific nations related to armament sales and donations, the forward deployment of U.S. military assets, and international military-to-military exercises. The following quotes are from a section of the Boeing website, Government Operations Overview. Boeing Government Operations serves the company in three ways. It works with government officials and organizations to protect and advance the company's interests, competitiveness, and reputation, when support for Boeing programs and shape public policy issues that impact the company. The office works with public officials across all levels of government, federal, state, local, to carry out this mission. It also works with various third parties, organizations such as think tanks, associations, public policy groups, and international organizations. While Boeing creates world-class commercial and defense products, the Government Operations Office solicits support needed from the government to ensure the company's success. For example, we work for fair trade practices at reasonable levels of taxation and regulations so that Boeing can remain competitive in global markets and support U.S. economic growth. In addition to these many functions, the office serves as a point of contact between federal, state, and local government, plus associated third parties, and the company's business units, end quote. Once more, for good measure, President Obama assigned James McNerney to serve as the chairman of the President's Export Council, while Mr. McNerney simultaneously was employed as the president and CEO of Boeing, while Mr. McNerney also serves as the chairman of the Business Roundtable. I'm making available to anyone who is interested the Violence Incorporated draft, an expose on the influence of the military-industrial complex on public policy and the trade agreements, which provides detailed evidence related to the information that I just spoke about, and a great deal more about government corporate collusion, which in this case is the contemporary military-industrial congressional complex manifested as the TPP. Jan at showupamerica.org. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Jan. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Our
You're
next
welcome.
guest is Arnie. Is it Saiki or Saiki?
It's Saiki.
Saiki. All right. Very, very good.
Yes.
Moana Nui Action Alliance. Arnie is the coordinator, and he's in California. Based on a series of conferences between the International Forum on Globalization and Pacific Island activists, academics, and practitioners, Moana Nui addresses economic and military, there's a word I haven't seen in a long time, issues in the Pacific. How about that one? He was the research director for Statehood Hawaii Ono Project. Currently, he's participating in the World Bank Fragility, Conflict, and Violence Forum in March and working with partner groups in the Pacific on West Papua liberation and opposing experimental seabed mining. Arnie, welcome.
Thank you, Andrea.
Love the shirt.
Let's see. I guess next slide. Well, first, let me thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks to the organizers for joining us on the call. Again, my name is Arnie, and I'm thrilled to be here. It was good having Jan's presentation. I think he really sets up this great context to the Pacific pivot or rebalance, which I'm going to argue is the intersection between trade and militarization. Before I begin, last week, one of the strongest voices for independence in Hawaii passed away, Kekuni Blaisdell. He was a person I was lucky enough to call friend, mentor, and papa. He was a professor emeritus and the founding chairman of the University of Hawaii School of Medicine, and his work on Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander health indicators is inseparable to the issues of independence and decolonization. Kekuni has been central to the work that I do, and some of these issues I'll be discussing. He inspired generations of activists, advocates, academics, and practitioners to take up the cause for justice in our homelands, for independence. Anyway, I was fortunate in that he was on the board of all these projects that I did, and he gave our kids their Hawaiian names, gave me the name for the website, inipuna.org. Kekuni also named the organizing group for the Moana Nui conferences, Pua Mohala Ikapo, which in Hawaii means blooming flower in the night. So by way of introducing this work, I want to honor him here and thank him for his guidance and support and hold the blooming flower in the night in our hearts. Next slide, please. Okay, so last week, Obama met with the leaders of the ASEAN countries and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in Sunnyland's retreat in Rancho Mirage, California. It's been compared to the Camp David of the West. There may be 600 or 700 people there, mostly from Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, and about 50 or so activists focusing on the TPP, and some First Nations brothers and sisters calling for the release of Leonard Peltier. It was an impressive event, and it was interesting to have these communities merge, even if there was not a lot of intersecting engagement. It is reported that while the two-day gathering at Sunnylands took place against mounting U.S. tensions with China over the South China Sea, the final U.S.-ASEAN declaration made no specific reference to the maritime disputes, despite Washington's wishes. Simply put, Obama was not able to convince the other non-TPP ASEAN countries of why containing China was good policy. Next slide. With the Southeast Asians there, all mostly from countries that were colonial territories before World War II, I do think there was a lost opportunity to engage deeper in the issues surrounding the South China Sea and the intersection between trade and militarization. Even though I understand that some might have really good reasons for not engaging in the militarization issue, I do think that trade campaigners miss a lot of opportunities mined by neglecting the militarization aspect. And how I come to this conclusion has a lot to do with the immediate post-World War II years, an area that I've done a lot of work in, particularly when I was working on the Hawaii Statehood Project. Now, you can come to this another time, but in a nutshell, the Marshall Plan, otherwise known as the 1948 Economic Cooperation Act, was an initiative that launched the Cold War. I've argued that it is Washington that used development aid as a means to coerce cooperating countries to accept free market, free trade policies that was, on the one hand, aimed at stopping the so-called threat of communism by exclusionary means, while on the other hand, giving U.S. industries and corporations greater access to markets and resources. Just to get a sense of how far-reaching the 1948 Economic Cooperation Act is, the immediate post-war years had an international forum on trade called the International Trade Organization, which sought to establish global rules for trade among the new United Nations. The U.S. Congress rejected it, opting to push forward its own agenda with the 1947 General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, a free market or anti-communist trade agreement. It did adopt some organizing principles from the ITO and revised it in 1950, but it wasn't until 1994, until after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that GATT was replaced with a new rules-based system that eventually included Russia and China, called the WTO. Arguably, what the U.S. is pushing for now with the TPP and TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, is a means to multilaterally circumvent WTO rules, which are stuck in what is called the Doha Development Round. So generally speaking, the Doha Development Round is conflicted over protections in developing countries and emerging economies. The advanced economies, like the U.S., Europe, and Japan, are trying to implement binding legal rules that generally do not favor developing countries and deal with the economic fundamentals of leveraging debt and privatization. So as a kind of a personal backstory, in 2009, when Hawaii was observing its 50th year of statehood, Obama announced joining the TPP. And because of the work I was doing, I was aware of the TPP, and my immediate response was to question the difference between a cooperation and a partnership. Personally, right or wrong, I've only seen the Trans-Pacific Partnership as a 21st century Marshall Plan or economic cooperation, an extension of what Senator Vandenberg described in 1949 as an economic turning point in history for 100 years to come. Next slide, please. When U.S. Navy Admiral Locklear said that we needed a TPP as much as a new aircraft carrier, so I think that's we have to go back a slide. I think I must have missed something. Oh, anyway, when U.S. Navy Admiral Locklear said that we needed a TPP as much as a new aircraft carrier, he was referring to the Pacific Pivot, a realignment of military and trade investments in the Asia Pacific. In his speech to the Senate Armed Services Committee, Secretary of Defense Carter argued that the TPP is as necessary for U.S. economic growth as it is to contain China's growth, particularly around the South China Sea and East Sea near North Korea. These transport access areas are all aimed at obstructing China's transport of goods in the region, where its rise in manufacturing and shipping of goods shifted the center of the economic world to Asia. Locklear testified, I am hopeful that Congress will pass trade promotion authority for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This vital trade agreement will open new opportunities for trade and level the playing field for American businesses and workers while sending a powerful strategic signal about America's commitment to the Asia Pacific. He further testified, yet we must remember that our soft power is a shadow cast by our hard power. That's why the United States must continue to sustain a favorable military balance in the region. The Department of Defense will need to update concepts of operations while emerging military technology to enable our military to operate in contested environments. And I'll get into this later, but these updated concepts of operations are outlined in the Vision 2020 Defense Security Cooperation Agency Manual, which is adjusted to harmonize with the Cooperation and Capacity Building chapter, or Chapter 21 in the signed TPPA. Locklear really does see the entire Asia Pacific as an American lake, an imaginary construct of 19th century U.S. expansionism and imperialism. Next slide. In the Pacific, and I want to make sure that we understand that the Pacific is not Asia. It's an entirely different region with vastly different peoples, histories, economies, and priorities. In the Pacific, many of those who make up the 12 independent countries and the 14 or so territories struggling for decolonization understand very well the intersection between trade and militarization. This intersection is embedded in our histories, and it is still going on with issues around fisheries, mining, agriculture, water, and the level to which this bullying takes place, especially in the non-independent areas like Hawaii, West Papua, Rapa Nui, the Moluccas, New Caledonia, French Polynesia, the Marshall Islands, etc., is deeply violent. And this includes other islands like Okinawa and Jeju in South Korea, and the Philippines, areas that have suffered tremendous historical loss as a result of the U.S. military. And we're still in the midst of fighting U.S. base building in the region. In West Papua, for those who don't know, there's been a genocide at the hands of Indonesia, a country that has a trade and investment framework agreement with the U.S. Considering Secretary of Defense Carter's hard power, soft power paradigm, when it comes to islands, there is no difference. It's just empire. in West Papua, an area that is literally half the size of California, U.S. mining giant Freeport-McMoRan gives tens of millions of dollars each year to Indonesian security forces to protect the Grasberg mine, which is the largest gold mine in the world, while the U.S. transfers weapons that include Apache helicopters and F-24 fighter jets. Even the UN Human Rights Rapporteur, Alfred Maurice de Zaya, who champions trade justice as a means to seek out a more equitable order, has called for these territories to be decolonized. And what is interesting about Marshall Plan era policy is that the lines of trade, militarization, labor, shipping, they all get blurred under the weight of decolonization. And what we find most abundantly clear is that the intersection between trade and militarization is most magnified by the shipping and transport of goods through waterways, straits, canals, and channels. So what the Cold War teaches us is that whoever controls these transport lines, whether physical or virtual, defines the empire. Next slide, please. So in Hawaii, too, we cannot separate trade from militarization. Pearl Harbor is Pacific Central Command. The coup of our queen, Liliuokalani, in 1893 involved the U.S. military support by American businessmen looking to annex Hawaii for the sugar trade. During World War II, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, they attacked a military base, not Hawaiians. To say that Hawaii is on the front lines is an understatement, and it's important to make clear that it was a reciprocity treaty, a U.S. free trade agreement that initially set the stage for this insecurity. As part of the reciprocity treaty between the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1875, the United States obtained exclusive rights to Pu'uloa, or Pearl Harbor, as part of the agreement that would allow Hawaiian sugar to enter the U.S. duty-free. And later, it was a U.S. military ship in Pearl Harbor that led to the coup, the ongoing military occupation of Hawaii. Next slide, please. So now Washington is asserting its presence in the South China Sea as a result of a few outposts being built by China. These outposts were originally built for commercial purposes, and I'm not going to say that China's intentions were always benign, because I'd never know that, but there is a legally binding agreement between China and ASEAN to address territorial disputes and the legal venue in which to hear and rule upon this in a case-by-case basis at the International Court of Justice. This agreement, the 2002 Declaration on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, is recognized by UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. I should add that the U.S. has not ratified UNCLOS, and it shouldn't be too much of a head-scratcher to understand why then the U.S. would push for a multilateral ruling that would disregard the bilateral approach and push China's territorial claim to a 12 nautical mile of its shore when the U.S. Navy runs rampant across all oceans and is not even a signatory to this agreement. Next slide, please. When you actually take a look at the South China Sea map, it's not surprising to see that the conflict over the disputed territories between Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, all PPP countries, and the Philippines, which is a long-held security cooperation with the U.S. The contested Senkaku Dayo Island, which is not in the picture, is an island dispute between Japan and China that provoked tensions and massive protests after Japan joined the TPP. But to be fair, this was something that Japan did unilaterally, and as far as I understand, was against the advisement of the U.S. State Department. I'd argue that it's not ASEAN that needs security from the U.S., it's that the U.S. has an insatiable need to control global waterways, shipping, and trade. I think the most obvious and overlooked point is Singapore. I guess it's easy to overlook considering that Singapore is a literal point at the southern tip of the Thai Malay Peninsula. Singapore is one of the original signers of the 2005 TPP-4. It is also home to Commonwealth Westpac Commander Logistics Group Western Pacific. And although it is not technically considered a base, it is the logistics center for the Navy's large presence in the region, and 4 U.S. warships are docked there. Singapore is also the gateway through the Strait of Malacca, the busiest shipping route in the world. And through this gateway, advanced shipping technologies that are mentioned or referred to in Chapter 2 of the TPP National Treatment and Market Access Chapter, it will provide TPP partner countries a fast track through the Strait. while non-TPP ships are more likely to be stopped and searched with no guarantee of timely delivery of goods. And so as we speak, there are some new anti-terrorism, anti-piracy, anti-trafficking, anti-smuggling policies being discussed that the U.S. Navy and its TPP maritime partners will take upon itself to enforce. Okay, next slide, please. When Obama joined the TPP and Secretary of State Clinton drafted the Pacific Pivot, new plans to realign U.S. military and trade in the region, propaganda and misinformation regarding the territorial dispute in the South China Sea became heightened. And I think it's important for trade campaigners to counter the misinformation campaign with some facts, which for internet research can be difficult considering that corporate media has literally inundated internet with misinformation. And so these are some of the historical points to consider, points that are conveniently left out of this misinformation campaign. It was the U.S.-backed Kuomintang that formally drew the 11-dash line of China's maritime boundary. However, when the People's Republic won in 1949, the communists inherited the 11-dash line, which China's premier Zhou Enlai later revised to a 9-dash line, withdrawing the boundary between Hainan Island and Vietnam. Another fact is that when we read that China's People's Liberation Army killed Vietnamese troops occupying the Paracel Islands in 1974, we have to note that these were U.S.-backed South Vietnamese troops that were killed. The Vietnam War was still going on, and that the North Vietnamese government at that time recognized China's claim of the Paracel Islands. Considering the timeline, it seems that Zhou Enlai and Ton Duc Dang, who is the president of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, may have come to an agreement over the area between Vietnam and Hainan Island, which would indicate why Zhou Enlai would revise the 11-dash line into a 9-dash line. Anyway, I think it's safe to assume that since World War II, Washington has been backing regimes that will give the U.S. greater maritime control over the region, and with the shift of the global economy centering around China, the Strategic Economic Partnership of the TPP establishes a multilateral rule-based consensus that would give the U.S. greater presence in the region, and of course that includes pushing China's disputed maritime claim of the South China Sea to 12 nautical miles of its shore. Next slide, please. So, as mentioned earlier, there was already a 2002 agreement between China and ASEAN to work through the disputed territory bilaterally. And since joining the TPP, Washington took it upon itself to impose the Freedom of Navigation proposal, which uses the TPP and other partner countries like the Philippines to try to multilaterally remove China's territorial claim. Essentially, this would be like trying to remove U.S. territorial claims over the Gulf of Mexico, which one can compare with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Again, UNCLOS recognizes the 2002 declaration, and the TPP focuses on UNCLOS law as it applies to international waters, not disputed territorial waters. As a side note, and I bring this up only because I find the legal language so specious and just weird, and this doesn't apply to just the TPP, but I think U.S. free trade agreement in general, but I'm going to read to you the definition of territories and the use of the word beyond. Territory means it's land territory, internal waters, and territorial sea, as well as any maritime area situated beyond the territorial sea, which has been or might in the future be designated under its national law in accordance with international law as an area within which said country may exercise sovereign rights or jurisdiction with regards to the sea, the seabed, the subsoil, and the natural resources. Next slide, please. To show just how insane this South China Sea situation is, this is all happening while the U.S. has just recently annexed nearly 2 million square kilometers of Pacific Ocean territory. Here is a map of the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, PRIMM, which is co-managed by the Departments of Defense and the Interior. The U.S. has nearly 400 military outpost structures and bases in the Pacific and is using those militarized areas as justification for annexing this area, despite objections by Pacific Island countries. Next slide, please. I was going to talk about the TPP BRICS, but that would add another 10 minutes to the presentation, but I just need to say something about it. So I would say this BRICS partnership between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa is extremely viable. The BRICS partnership are all emerging economies with different priorities regarding access to government debt and resource equity, and with different rules for leveraging that debt. The US, EU, and Japan are the major OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries, which, not coincidentally, were formed out of the Marshall Plan. Anyway, short of World War III, which is essentially, the endgame scenario we're all afraid of, I believe that the strength of the BRICS economies will withstand the obstruction and containment policy that the TPP envisions. The TPP will only be successful if the neoliberal economic order survives, and I'm not convinced that it will, considering that the US, EU, and Japan's debt to GDP is far greater than the collected economies of the TPP TTIP countries combined. And should there be another meltdown, the BRICS countries will survive as they did in 2008, and they will likely carry the rest of the developing world along with them. Economic neoliberalism should have died in 2008, and the astronomical debt that we've incurred since then has really only put the neoliberal system on life support, not resuscitated it. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of the TPP agreement, here's some text in Chapter 21 of the Cooperation and Capacity chapter. It may seem benign, as there is no smoking gun announcing military intent and strategy written into the trade agreement, but I will argue that this chapter harmonizes with new bully rules that will use cooperation among member economies to impede the transport of goods of non-TPP countries through the region while privileging U.S. access and security. We can look at both the experience of Hawaii's own history with the Reciprocity Treaty as well as the Marshall Plan to see how a multilateral rules-based system that is exclusionary can provoke a nuclear arms race and a Cold War, and see that this intersection between trade and militarization is just a really bad idea. When we read the language of this chapter, how TPP cooperation initiates and undertakes collaboration to enhance donor coordination, like the World Bank, and to facilitate public-private cooperation and capacity building activities by inviting private sector entities and other relevant institutions to assist in the development and implementation of cooperation capacity building activities. What we're looking at can certainly apply to building hospitals, bridges, schools, but it also applies to military partnerships. Next slide, please. If we apply the business end of the DoD, the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, for example, and to be clear, there are other DoD agencies like the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement that we can look at, but the DSCA readily, as almost like a business plan, readily harmonizes with TPP coordination and capacity building. The DSCA supports and enables the synchronization of security cooperation efforts to meet U.S. and partner country customer expectations. By aligning efforts of strategic priorities like the South China Sea, the TPP enables military partnerships and cooperation to function as international investment agreements. In terms of trade and services, the Status of Forces Agreement, SOFA, is included in the Defense Security Cooperation, and the SOFA generally establishes the legal framework under which DoD military and civilian personnel operate in a partner nation. But it addresses matters such as taxation, criminal jurisdiction, and a bunch of other privileges and immunities. So in terms of services, the Status of Forces Agreement provides not only access but revenue for both government as well as private defense contractors. Next slide, please. In the U.S.-Japan bilateral agreement signed a couple years ago, military and trade services became more fully embedded and integrated into the partnership between the U.S. and Japan. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. So this just really summarizes this presentation, and thank you for listening. But it's just wanted to drive to the point that we view this Trans-Pacific Partnership as a containment and obstruction strategy. It's making the region far more unstable by invoking a new kind of regional military that will do little more than perpetuate a policy of global corporate government or the 1%. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Arnie. And I know everybody on the call is really, really, really going to want to get this PowerPoint. This is going to be very, very, very important. Oops, I may have the slides a little bit out of order. That should work. Our next speaker is Nina Macapinlac. Nina is an activist with Bayan USA, an alliance of 20 progressive Filipino organizations in the United States. Bayan USA is the overseas chapter of Bayan in Philippines, which is fighting for the national liberation of the Philippines. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the previous speakers for your really informative presentations. So I just wanted, if you could just go to the next slide. I just wanted to start my presentation by first saying that February 4th of this year did not only mark the signing of the TPP, but it also marked the 117-year anniversary of a little-known war called the Philippine-American War. And this war was between the United States and the Philippines, when the Philippines objected to the terms of the Treaty of Paris, in which the U.S. gained its first colonies from Spain: Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. So this war was basically a laboratory for the U.S. as a new imperialist superpower to develop war tactics like counterinsurgency, occupation, and torture tactics like waterboarding, which they will replicate in future wars of aggression in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Pictured here are American soldiers posing with dead Philippine soldiers. Over 1 million Filipinos died during this war. Next slide, please. So following this war, the United States has vastly influenced the political, economic, and military decisions of the Philippines up to this day. I give this historical context to establish that the U.S. geopolitical strategy of economic and military intervention has its roots in over a century of domination. Next slide, please. So this past November, November 18 to 19, 2015, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, or APEC Summit, was held in Manila in the Philippines. So APEC was founded in 1989. It's made up of 21 member states and economies. It includes the three biggest economic superpowers: Japan, China, and the United States. This past summit, the topmost agenda item for APEC leaders revolved around regional economic integration into the neoliberal framework. The Free Trade Area of the Asia-Pacific, or FTAAP, was proposed during APEC as a comprehensive and binding agreement on trade and investment issues that will support the World Trade Organization and the goal of integration. The two major trade pathways to the FTAAP at the APEC Summit were the U.S.-led TPP and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is a looser form of integration between 16 countries and includes China, but not the U.S. The Philippines is not currently a member of the TPP, but is already part of RCEP. But at the conclusion of the APEC Summit in November, all members, whether part of the TPP or not, reaffirmed its member states' commitment to the proposed free trade area of the Asia-Pacific through the implementation of regional trade schemes, specifically naming both the Trans-Pacific Partnership and RCEP. Next slide, please. At the end of the APEC Summit in November, President Benigno Aquino, being the gracious host that he was, expressed his interest of joining the TPP, to which Obama responded positively. And you can see in this quote, he says, "We welcome the Philippines' interest in TPP, and we've directed our trade ministers to have discussions about how TPP is going to be implemented among the original 12 countries and how we can work with the Philippines to follow through on their interests." However, to be part of the TPP, many Philippine economists have pointed out that the Philippines has to change its constitution. The current charter currently limits 40% foreign ownership of public utilities, land, and media companies, disqualifying the Philippines from joining. So next slide, please. So to coincide with this big summit and gathering of neoliberal leaders around the world was another gathering called the International League of People's Struggle Fifth International Assembly. So this league is made up of anti-imperialist and democratic organizations from around the world, and it brought over 400 people to the assembly in Philippines from over 30 countries. During this assembly, ILPS delegates discussed how to strengthen their movements around the world. And the Bayan USA is actually part of the ILPS USA chapter. And so we sent 40 delegates from different organizations, not just in Bayan, but also Palestinian Youth Movement, International Action Center, Chelsea Uniting Against the War, United National Anti-War Committee, and many others to be a part of this big gathering of anti-imperialist freedom fighters. There were figures such as Leila Khaled of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Jose Maria Sison, who is the chairperson of the International League of People's Struggle, and others that gave presentations at this assembly. Next slide, please. So this assembly was not only just to discuss how to strengthen their work, but was also intentionally trying to combat the APEC summit and the negotiations of different world leaders to basically, further the crisis of imperialism. And within the ILPS, there are 17 concerns to which there are corresponding committees or commissions. And during the assembly, members were encouraged to split off into different commissions. But the commission that dealt the most with the TPP was concern number 2, which, as we can see on the slide, says on the socio-economic development for oppressed and exploited countries and nations, and social equity for all working people. And one of the resolutions of this commission is on the slide as well. It says U.S. imperialism is countermaneuvering with new free trade agreements such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. These are largely politically motivated designs to institute new rules on trade to maintain full spectrum dominance of U.S. finance and corporate monopolies through a renewed scheme of neocolonization of emerging rivals that, if successful, would subject foreign governments to these monopolies. And in this picture, you can see the different figures of the ILPS with placards condemning the APEC summit. Next slide, please. So after the assembly concluded and different resolutions were passed and strategies were made on how to work together into the future, international delegates of the ILPS were actually able to join the Philippine people in protesting the APEC summit. There were 5,000 people in a rally just a couple of kilometers outside where the leaders were meeting. There would have been 3 times as many people if the Philippine Army hadn't put up checkpoints throughout the entire country because people were coming from all over the Philippines. There was even a warrant issued for the arrest and deportation of any foreigners, meaning us as the delegates, caught taking part in these anti-APEC rallies. But fortunately, none of us were arrested due to the high discipline organization of Philippine activists. Next slide, please. So at the conclusion of the APEC and at the conclusion of ILPS 5th International Assembly, there are also many other developments regarding militarization because, as many of the other speakers have mentioned already, this pivot or rebalancing is both economic and military intervention. So towards the end of November, it was announced that the U.S. Would increase its military aid to the Philippines from $50 million to $79 million. And shortly after, on January 12, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement was upheld by the Philippine Supreme Court. And contrary to the clear provisions in the Philippine Constitution in relation to foreign troops, base, and facility, that actually requires a treaty approved by the Senate of the Philippines, and that must also be recognized by other country, the Supreme Court insisted that EDCA is legal as it is only an executive agreement. This ratification of EDCA is a blow to the national sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Philippines. This signals the return and extensive establishment of U.S. military bases in different parts of the country. This overturns the historical decision of the Philippine Senate in 1991 to kick out U.S. military bases to the junking of the proposal for a new RP-U.S. military bases treaty. Because of the Supreme Court decision in the Philippines, the lands and facilities will be lent by Filipinos for free to U.S. troops. These facilities will be subject to exclusive control by foreign troops, and the Philippines will be used as a zone for the U.S. military intervention in the region to launch wars in other parts of the world. These bases will also be used for more U.S. intervention in the internal affairs of the country, particularly on armed struggles between the government and revolutionary armed movements. Basically, the whole country will be used by the U.S. as a storage for arms, including nuclear arms, which is absolutely forbidden in the Philippine Constitution, as well as other weapons of mass destruction. And there are currently 8 locations in the country which will serve as agreed locations under EDCA. So, as a lot of us have already touched on this intersection between military and economic strategy, militarization is used to secure U.S. control over trade routes, markets, and territories to maintain its hegemony in the world. Having a very strategic location in the Asia-Pacific with easy access to China and surrounding countries, the Philippines is used to deepen U.S. aggression in the Asia-Pacific to the indefinite basing of U.S. soldiers, many of whom are being deployed to the Philippines from the Middle East. The peoples of the Philippines and the Asia-Pacific region have been waging struggle against U.S. domination for over a century. Both EDCA and TPP are symptoms of the intensifying crisis of imperialism. As Bayan USA, we recognize that our current struggle is a continuation of the unfinished Philippine Revolution. Back then, it took the form of the Philippine-American War, but now it is this pivot. Oh, if you could just go to the next slide, please. So, as you can see, back then it was the Philippine-American War. Now it is in the form of both EDCA, TPP, and other free trade agreements. So both have and will take lives and create the conditions for human rights violations to the exploitation of a nation's human and natural resources. As Bayan USA, we want genuine independence for our country and people, and call on the end of the TPP and other treaties like it, as well as EDCA, the Visiting Forces Agreement, and other military agreements that only violate the sovereignty of the Philippines. The next slide is the last one. So, as I mentioned before, there is a U.S. chapter of the International League of People's Struggle, to which Bayan USA is a member. So we call on anyone who may be interested to join the International League of People's Struggle. And if you want to know more, you can check out the website, ilps.info, or contact me at my email address. So thank you very much. Down with imperialism, long live international solidarity.
Thank you, Nina. All right, now you have just heard 3 wonderful speakers. If you wish to ask a question on your phone, press *6, and that will put you in the queue. And now you're going to need to tell us what speaker you would like to answer your question. So whether you want to ask a question of Arnie, Jan, or Nina. So I'm already seeing callers in my queue. Jim Campbell, go ahead and ask your question. or caller at area code 908. You're showing up as Jen Campbell. Your line's open. Go ahead.
Yes, Hugh Campbell from Union, New Jersey. The question is for Arnie. In August 1996, Al-Qaeda declared war on the Americas, and one of their goals was to spread out the U.S. military. In your opinion, would the passage of TPP spread out the U.S. military and enable terrorism?
Well, thank you for your question. I do think that's a little bit of a loaded question, and it's especially in regard to how. I do think that there's a very strong link between what we consider to be terrorism and trade, and I think one of the other things that we might need to look at is, in terms of the systemic roots of terrorism, we might, want to ask, why would the World Trade Center, for example, be the object of an attack? And we might also want to begin to sort of question the why or how these sort of exclusionary trade practices, these exclusionary trade rules, how have they impacted countries, specifically the resource-dependent countries, creating, helping to sort of like ferment this the animosity towards the United States. And I'm sure we're not going to answer this question here, but I think it's really complicated to note that terrorism is, and by itself is not something that is born and bred in a vacuum.
Next question, caller, you are at area code 760. I believe that's Georgia. No, 760, not Georgia. So caller at area code 760. Your line's open. Go ahead. Your line's open. All right. I will come back. Paul Flansburgh. Go ahead, Paul. Paul, did you mute your line? Because I've unmuted you.
Okay, now I'm glad. Yeah, you muted me for a second there. All right. I have a question. It's more of a general question for all three panelists, but I guess I could ask about Jan specifically. We've been given a lot of information by something we've understand the corporate media, which feeds us information in a way that will allow us to think in different ways, but does not give us enough information about things which are very important. And so I would like to know if there is a dominant narrative presented by the corporate media which confronts the wisdom of what you say. And what would that be?
What's your name, please?
Paul Flansburgh. I'm from Rochester, New York.
Paul, thank you very much. I'm going to be brief. I'm going to go over one example. There are newspapers that are delivered every day to every congressional office: The Hill, Politico, and Roll Call. And the large-scale weapons manufacturers take out full-page ads in those papers. I was in touch with the editor of The Hill about why they did not print my letters to the Senate, which address this. And I got a call saying, these are very good points that you raised, but these are our advertisers, and we're not able to run your letters. This is across the board with corporate control of our media. It's very difficult to get the information through alternative media. But what I did is I did original research into the White House, State Department, Department of Defense. So most of my research is in their own words. And hopefully the information that I was able to obtain that I put in together into my 69-page expose will be revealing. And Paul, glad to share it with you. But that was one glaring example. And I have copies of those ads in my expose. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Next caller, you're showing up on my board at Stacy, area code 509.
Yes, thank you. My name is Stacy Cossey. I live in Spokane, Washington. And I guess I don't necessarily have a question, but I do want to express my deep sorrow at being part of the U.S. imperialism and exploitation of all of your countries. And all your presentations made me feel like this needs to go up another notch. And there's a deeper understanding and importance. And so I thank you all. And again, I apologize from the bottom of my heart. It's heartbreaking.
Thank you, Stacy. Zara.
Hello?
Hello, your line's open.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you fine.
Yes, this is for Arnie. My question is regarding the American Navy has been exercising constant intrusions inside that 12-mile zone of the islands that in the South China Sea, and lately they've been bringing in other countries. Japan apparently has a whole ring of various missile batteries that they're contributing to this effort. They've got the Philippines that are going to cooperate, and they've got a whole series of countries that are going to participate in these 12-mile zone intrusions with them. And my question is, it doesn't seem to me as though it's to the benefit of these countries to get involved in something that, with just the wrong spark, could spark a very serious hot war. And what do you think is the reason, or how is the United States able to get these countries to cooperate with this U.S. series of intrusions into that 12-mile zone, where it really has no benefit to the countries? In fact, it puts those countries at risk if a hot war breaks out. And I just boggles my mind. I'm wondering if you have any insights into how they're getting these countries to cooperate in what seems like a very dangerous operation.
Arnie, I think that was for you.
But for Arnie.
I have to apologize because I just got back on the line. I was wanting to respond to Stacy's point, and then I accidentally turned my phone off. So I did catch the tail end, and I know that this last question did have something to do with the UN Convention, the Law of the Sea, the 12 nautical mile imposed zone that the U.S. is trying to push for. But I'm sorry, can you please repeat your question?
Yes, I basically it's a United States initiative to challenge the China on these islands by intentionally violating that 12-mile zone. But I guess the part that I was wondering if you could give insights on is they seem to be getting the Japanese, they seem to be getting the Philippines, they seem to be getting all of these other countries to cooperate with them in these intrusions. And I fail to see there's a benefit to these countries in participating, because in this situation where there are constant intrusions into that 12-mile zone, it seems as though just the wrong move could spark a hot war. That would not be the benefit to those countries in the region. The country that sees it's going to benefit by expanding its empire is the United States. And if you have any insights on how they're getting these other countries to participate in that when it doesn't seem it's to their benefit, and it basically puts them at risk. And so any insights you can provide on why they seem to be cooperating on a very high risk, what seems to me unreasonable violation of China's territory. Any insights you could provide, it would be very interesting and appreciated.
Thank you. And then, I'm sorry, what is your name?
Vera Mold.
Vera. Oh, thank you, Vera. That was a good question, and I do think that yes, it's an extremely dangerous game, and China. I personally do not think that China is going to back down from this operation. In terms of what the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia received out of this. When we're talking about Vietnam, when we're talking about these ASEAN countries, I mean they're generally speaking they're very poor countries, and so right now China being dominant in the region, I wouldn't say that Vietnam and Malaysia are completely on board and are completely comfortable with provoking China to such a degree that it would create a regional war within the South China Sea, especially because Vietnam still has strong military arrangements and alignments with Russia, and Malaysia and Vietnam both also depend on China. I think for these two countries and specifically, they see the sort of the new advantages of joining, simply the trade cooperation of, with the United States and being able to, raise the living standards the way that China had done, by allowing U.S. industries or just the cooperating industries to begin work in the area. So it's yes, it is a very difficult question. In terms of the Philippines, I may think that Nina would be better. I'm sorry, is it Nina? The other person that was on Nina, if that she was able to to talk about why or how the Philippines are aligning itself militarily with the United States in the collusion of this sort of South China Sea's island dispute.
So I think that there's a long history of the Philippines and the U.S. In terms of war and economic agreements. So that's just the general trend. I think every single war that the United States has been in, the Philippines has fought alongside the U.S. However, in terms of the dispute in the South China Sea, the Philippines was gravely concerned by the reports of missile deployments there recently. So it's not like a totally unwarranted concern, right? I think that what a lot of progressive organizations like Bayan USA are trying to project is not only no to U.S. intervention, but no to any form of intervention, whether it's from China or the U.S. So I think that I hope that answered your question. I'm not entirely sure if that was what you're asking. But yeah, that's where that is right now.
All right, thank you. And this is our last question. Our last caller, you are on Skype, or you are blocking me. I do not have a name.
Stephen Costis of New York City.
Hey, Stephen, I was going to say it's that you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Post, is Hawaii still going to be one of the 50 nifty United States of America post post Hague defeat of CPP and EDAC?
That's another phone call. That's another session.
That's a question for Arnie.
Yes. That's obviously a very long and complicated question. I don't know the organizations that you're referring to, but in terms of the decolonization struggles that are going on in the Pacific, for the most part, most people are, at least most of the islands, are looking at the routes of decolonization through the Decolonization Committee at the UN, but Hawaii is a little more complicated in that there are two distinct narratives regarding deoccupation and decolonization that are at the heart, but most of them have to do with sort of a restoration of the kingdom. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Nina, Jan, and Arnie. All right. We are going to go back to our next set of speakers. Now, Margaret, are you okay on time? Are you good?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking.
All righty. Our next member of our call planning team is Adam Weissman. As I said earlier, he is with Trade Justice and Global Justice for Animals and the Environment. Adam recruits a lot of the speakers that we have on this call, and Adam tracks the events and news stories that relate to the trade agreement, both TPP as well as TPP. So, Adam, take it away. Your news reports are up.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. A lot of interesting stories this week. So to get started, the Center for Economic and Policy Research on their Beat the Press blog has released an article talking about the Peterson Institute study, which we know is a study that the Obama administration has been pushing as the one with the most rosy analysis of TPP. The authors of the study have been claiming that the trade deal, TPP, will lead to a $357 billion increase in annual exports. What they are not saying as loudly is that by virtue of their model, that will also mean a $357 billion increase in imports, because their model takes as an assumption, unquestioned and impossible to question, that there will be a balance of trade subsequent to the trade agreement. It does not consider the possibility of the creation of a trade deficit. So at best, according to their model, there will be a zeroed out, the assumption of their model, there will be a zero balance of trade, which raises the question, how exactly is this going to be an agreement that creates jobs that aren't already there through exports? And raises the even greater question, if they are not considering the reality of potential trade deficit, why exactly, other than to generate propaganda for the Obama administration? So that article was the focus of a conference call this past Wednesday, hosted by our friends at Citizens Trade Campaign. And if people want to hear that conference call featuring Dean Baker for Center for Economic and Policy Research, if you go to the tradejustice.net/news link and click on the most recent set of headlines, you can find a link to listen to that there. The Peruvian government is going ahead and pushing TPP to a vote in their Congress. Hello?
Yep.
Hello?
We hear you.
Did you lose me for a second? There?
Just for a second, but you're back.
I'm sorry. What? Sorry. I'm sorry. Did you say you lost me for a second there?
Yeah, but you're back, and it was only a second.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so the Peruvian government is sending TPP to a vote in the Peruvian Congress, but there's a caveat on that. Unlike in the United States, Peru does not have fast track, which means that the Peruvian Congress, by admission of their government, can deal with this agreement or not deal with it whenever they want. they are not forced to vote on it on a timeline set by their administration. However, in one sense, that's also not true. That's also true in our country, because even though the Obama administration has the power to send TPP to Congress under fast-track rules, which would require a vote in the House within 60 days and in the Senate within 90, they're not going to do that if they don't have the votes. And Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, amusingly, within the last week, said that he is not the dictator of the House, has no idea when the votes will be there to pass TPP, doesn't see the votes there at this point, sees serious problems with the agreement in terms of getting those votes, and feels that the agreement needs to be changed for those votes to materialize, which is obviously no easy feat. That would mean reopening and renegotiating the agreement. He, when asked a question about whether there might be a vote in the lame duck session, he commented that I am not the micromanager of the House, and I don't see where the votes are right now. So he is pretty much throwing up his hands in terms of moving this agreement, at least in his public rhetoric. The Obama administration, as we've heard, is looking to expand TPP to the more ASEAN nations. They are calling, and they called at the recent summit with ASEAN leaders of ASEAN nations, for the additional 6 countries in ASEAN that are not already part of TPP to join the agreement, and they're going to be setting up a series of workshops for those countries to learn about the potential rules of TPP and what it would mean to join this deal. So they're pushing hard to grow the agreement. Meanwhile, we've already heard that TPP, since it is a done deal negotiation, cannot be changed without reopening this already signed agreement. Well, it looks like they found a loophole to make TPP go from bad to worse in a very sneaky way. We've heard a little bit about the legal scrub regarding TPP, where lawyers have to go over the agreement, look at the final language, and make sure that it's all legally kosher in all the different languages, that it will hold up legally. Well, it turns out they made a tiny little change in terms of wording, but a very significant change in terms of impact in the intellectual property rules of the agreement when they did that, by adding 3 letters. This is why really only legal experts can decipher these trade agreements, because they made a huge change by adding the letters sub before the word paragraph. And the effect of that change will be that now potentially criminal penalties can be applied to copyright infringement with no actual harm on the copyright holder if, for example, you take a video and add subtitles to it in another language where that video is not originally available, a language the video may never even be translated into, so you're causing no commercial harm to the copyright holder. You can now potentially be criminally liable for that infringement. And there's a new report on that from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Sneaky change to the TPP drastically extends criminal penalties. Hopefully we can get them on a call soon to explain further. The 2 more big stories. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People says that TPP threatens indigenous land rights. Speaking specifically about the investor rights in this agreement, they spoke to the infamous case between the U.S. and Ecuador. Between the U.S. and Ecuador, between Chevron Texaco and Ecuador, where Chevron used the U.S.-Ecuador bilateral investment treaty to escape billions of dollars in $17 billion in penalties for polluting the Ecuadorian Amazon and poisoning indigenous people, and saying that cases like these are very likely to happen under TPP. And finally, some good news. The influential Democrat Sander Levin, who is the ranking member of the House Ways and Means Committee, the committee that trade agreements go through, has come out against TPP. He has long been skeptical of this agreement, but he has now come out against it in very strong words, saying that Vietnam, Malaysia, and Mexico engage in abhorrent abuses of fundamental rights, competing internationally in a race to the bottom that harms workers everywhere. So you can read these stories and about 20 more by going to tradejustice.net/news and clicking on the most recent headline. You'll also see a link to our most recent webinar video, to other recent conference calls and panel events, including a live stream of the event that Nina talked about. So again, it's tradejustice.net/news. And let's go to the next slide. Great. Okay, so to plan and promote these webinars, we need your help. These are volunteer organized efforts. We need to make sure that people see the videos that we produce in these webinars. We need to ensure that we keep growing the audience for these webinars, and we need to keep booking speakers like the great people you heard from tonight and putting together these PowerPoint presentations that you're watching right now. If you would like to help with this effort, you can go to tradejustice.net/TJpoll. There's a typo on the screen right now. It says tradejustice/net. That should be .net, tradejustice.net/TJpoll. And you can fill out a poll for either our call planning team or our call outreach and publicity team to let us know when you are available to attend the next meeting of those two committees so that you can join up in our organizing effort and help make these calls a success to help build this mass movement to stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other rotten trade deals. Okay, thanks a lot, everyone. I'll be back with you at the end of the call to announce our call next week, but that's it for now. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Adam. Our next speaker has joined us many, many times, Dr. Margaret Flowers. She is a pediatrician, and she is co-chair of the Maryland chapter of Physicians for a National Health Program. A lot of us know that organization at PNHP. Margaret is also co-director of PopularResistance.org and It's Our Economy, and she's co-organizer of Flush the TPP. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us and staying with us.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea, and everybody who organized this call. Very informative. Great call tonight. I won't talk for very long. I basically just want to go over a few things. Forbes, I believe it was Forbes that recently reported that President Obama is putting less emphasis on the transatlantic trade and investment partnership so that he can focus more on the TPP. Now, whether that's accurate or not, we're not sure. But I wanted to say that because, we're hearing that the votes aren't there. We're hearing that it may be lame duck or beyond, but it's important for us to remain vigilant because this is a huge piece of Obama's legacy and a very high priority for him. And so we can anticipate that throughout the year he will continue to try to find a way to get the TPP ratified by Congress. And so it's up to us to continue the great work that everybody has been doing. The amount of resistance across the nation has just been really tremendous. Every week there are more actions going on, and we're going to need to try to continue to maintain that pressure as much as possible through this year so that by the time the lame duck session comes around, there is still an absence of votes for the TPP implementing legislation. This past week was President's Week, and there were many actions that people took focusing on members of Congress, all kinds of different activities that people engaged in. And I just posted a really great video today on Popular Resistance, a report from Bismarck, North Dakota, where they had over 100 people come out and protest, telling their members of Congress not to vote for the TPP. So it was really awesome to see. It was very much organized by the North Dakota AFL-CIO. Really great action. People are continuing to send in actions to us at Flush the TPP, so we post those on the map. You'll want to check that at flushthetpp.org/actions, and you'll see on the map there pinpoints in different locations around the country that you can click on and see what's going on there. If you're organizing an action, please let us know so that we can put it on the map and help you to promote it. Also on flushthetpp.org, we have a series of tools pages, tools for education, for media, for actions, for TPP-free zones. We really urge you to go and check out those tools. If there's something that you need and you can't find it there, write to us through the contact page at Flush the TPP. We'll try to help you, as well as Mara Cohen, who I'm not sure she's on the call tonight, but Mara is volunteering to be a resource coordinator. So if you need help with making a flyer or just knowing how to phone bank to turn people out, or any kind of organizing skills or resources that you might need, you can get in touch with Mara. Just write to me through the Flush the TPP contact page and I'll connect you. I wanted to remind people about our Wednesday night TPP resistance calls. It's every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. And you can get the information for that call and how to register on our news page. It's always the top post there that's easy to find. As well as on that post, you will find recordings from previous calls. Last week, people really shared a lot about the different types of actions that they've been taking. A lot of really great ideas were shared on that call. And this week we'll be talking about potentially doing a mobilization in early May when members of Congress are home in anticipation of the report that's going to be coming out from the U.S. International Trade Commission, and being ready to really focus on the impact of the TPP on our economy and get our dominant message out there in early May, as well as putting pressure on our members of Congress while they're home in their districts that first week. So I urge you to join the Wednesday night call and continue all the great work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And because this is an election year, members are at home a lot more than they normally are. Extra slide. Let me just go. All righty. I've got a bunch of extra slides. That's always good. Let's see. Adam already did the volunteer. I've got all these extra slides, Adam, from your last presentation, but this is the one we want. I'm not going to take any questions for Margaret and or Adam. If you have any questions, *6. All right. First question, it's from area code 347. Go ahead. Your line is open.
Hello?
Hello, we hear you.
Thank you. I'm Marty. I'm from New York. You know, all of our political candidates, or some of them, are against the TPP. Okay, Sanders is loud and clear. Clinton, who knows what she's thinking, but she has said she's against it. And surprisingly, even Donald Trump is against it. They are having rallies all over the country. Can't we get out to their rallies with our TPP information and say that these candidates are against the TPP? Call your member of Congress to vote no. Can we use this as a tool for promoting awareness on TPP and getting people to call their Congress members?
Very interesting, because there are thousands of people at Trump and Sanders rallies. Margaret and or Adam.
Margaret, do you want to start?
I think that's a really fantastic idea to go out to those rallies with flyers, flyer the people that are waiting in line, and really do, yes, encourage them to put the pressure on their members of Congress. Thank you.
I would agree. There's not much more to say. It's a great idea.
Yes, because remember, at those big rallies, people are sometimes standing in line for hours. Give them something educational and constructive to do. Although, again, remember, you're going to need to bring thousands of leaflets and flyers for some of these rallies.
I do want to actually add one note, now that I think about it. First of all, so Ted Cruz is also at this point against TPP. Marco Rubio and John Kasich are not. That makes them, if we want to talk about political targets to really hammer for their TPP opposition, if they're great candidates to do it with, and that will only, if there's publicity about disruptions at their event about TPP, we can be sure that that'll only encourage Donald Trump to bring up the issue in the debates even more, and use it as something to slam them about. Additionally, Hillary Clinton, no one really particularly trusts her position, including the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who's said publicly that he thinks that, I think his words are, she's still a Clinton, and that her position will probably last as long as it's politically expedient for her to act. We need to keep the pressure up on her to make it clear that she isn't going to pull an Obama who in 2008 campaigned as a foe of NAFTA, opposed the Korea and Colombia Free Trade Agreement, and then passed those Korea and Colombia trade agreements, and instead of getting rid of or fixing NAFTA, gave us NAFTA on steroids. So we need to ask how Hillary Clinton, who, as we heard before from Arnie, was very much a part of framing the Asia-Pacific pivot agenda, is going to actually stick to opposition to TPP, and why anyone should believe her on that. She needs to give us some answers, and people should be asking her that.
Excellent point, Adam. And I'm going to say even extend it to the congressional candidates. So if there are congressional candidates that are running or having events and they've got people show up with their flyers, this is a critical deal. Remember, this changes everything. America, as we know it, basically disappears under the TPP. All right. Adam, let's take us into our next call.
Great, will do. Okay, so next week we're honored to be joined by David Korten, who many of you may know as the author of When Corporations Rule the World. He is also well known for his association with Yes Magazine. He's going to be talking to us about TPP's threat to democracy. And as always, this call will begin at 7:30 p.m. in the Pacific, 7:30 p.m. in the Eastern time zone. Next Sunday, the 28th. If you'd like to register, you can go to tradejustice.net/callreg. And please help us get the word out about this event. Go to the Global TPP Team Facebook group to find the Facebook event. Invite your friends. Share it everywhere. Let's have twice as many people on the call next week, and let's kill the TPP.
All right. Thank you very much, Adam. I'm again going to thank all of our speakers who were wonderful, and again, our very, very special guests, Jan, Arnie, and Nina. So until next week, I'm going to wish everybody a happy week. Find something that you can do to help your neighbors understand what TPP is and why it needs to be opposed at all costs.
Your conference recording has stopped. Q&A session is over.
I will be posting the recorded link to the call in about 10 minutes. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very
much.
Good night, everybody. Thanks so much, Andrea.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Wonderful call.
Wonderful, everybody. Bye.